Am I the asshole for refusing to babysit my sister's kids after she called me a loser for not having a real job, even though I've always been there for her and her kids? I'm a 28-year-old guy, and I have a younger sister, Maggie, who's 24. We've always been really close. Growing up in a family that was tight-knit, I ended up being the one looking out for her a lot since our parents worked long hours. I taught her to ride a bike, helped her with schoolwork, and even comforted her through her first heartbreak with ice cream and bad movies. She used to call me her hero, and honestly, that meant everything to me. After Maggie had her kids, two adorable little ones, ages 5 and 3, I felt like it was my responsibility to help out. That's what big brothers are for, right? You step up. Maggie had her first child at 19. She was young, scared, and trying to figure things out. Her boyfriend at the time, now her ex, was in and out of the picture, mostly out. So I was there, helping with the baby while she tried to balance work and her personal life. I didn't mind at all. I love my niece and nephew. They're full of energy and just wonderful. Sure, it's tiring sometimes, but they've always brought me so much joy. It almost became routine for me to watch them several times a week, sometimes for the entire day if she needed it. No matter what, I was happy to be there for her because she's my little sister, and I wanted her to succeed. I wanted her to have the chance to work, maybe go on a date again, or just have time to breathe. But recently, something's changed. Maggie's been making little digs at me, and it's only gotten worse. At first, it was just an occasional comment that I could ignore, like, must be nice to sleep in until 10, when I'd show up to babysit, or if only we could all be as relaxed as you, when I mentioned taking a day for myself. I know my career hasn't exactly been taking off. I've had some struggles finding my path, bouncing between different jobs, and some of which were pretty dead-end, I'll admit. But I'm working on it. I'm doing freelance graphic design now, and while it's not a steady 9 to 5, I'm actually making decent money and building a portfolio. I always thought Maggie understood that. She knew I'd had a tough couple of years, especially during COVID, when everything seemed to be falling apart. I figured she'd be the last person to judge me. Instead, it feels like she's become my biggest critic. It's like she's projecting her own stress onto me, but rather than talking it out, she's decided I'm an easy target. What really got to me happened a few weeks ago. We were at a family dinner, just me, Maggie, the kids, and our parents. The evening had started off well. My niece and nephew were their usual energetic selves, running around, and I was helping settle them at the table. Everything seemed fine, until my mom asked if I'd picked up any new freelance clients. I told her I was working on it, and that while progress was slow, things were starting to look up. Maggie snorted, and I could feel her eyes on me. I tried to ignore it, but then she said it clear as day in front of everyone. Maybe that's why you don't have a real job. My mom looked shocked, and my dad just cleared his throat awkwardly. The kids, of course, were too absorbed in their chicken nuggets to notice, but I felt like I'd been slapped. I tried to laugh it off and said something like, "Wow, okay, thanks for the support," but Maggie just rolled her eyes. "Oh, come on, I'm just joking. You take everything so seriously." I didn't respond at that family dinner. I didn't want to make a scene in front of our parents or the kids, so I just shut down for the rest of the evening. I barely said a word, while Maggie acted like everything was fine, as if she hadn't just torn into me in front of everyone. This wasn't the first time she'd made comments like that, but it was definitely the worst. Her words kept playing on repeat in my head for days, and the more I thought about it, the angrier I got. The next time Maggie called me to babysit, I told her I couldn't. I said I was busy. She sounded annoyed but said she'd find another way. A few days later, she called again, and once more I told her I wasn't available. This time she pushed back, asking why I was being so difficult. I took a deep breath and told her, "Look, Maggie, I love you and the kids, but I'm not going to keep doing favors for someone who thinks I'm a loser. I'm not going to help you if you can't show me some basic respect." There was a pause, and then she laughed, a genuine laugh. "Are you serious?" she said. "You're really that upset about a joke? You need to grow up." I felt my face flush. I told her it wasn't a joke to me, that I've always been there for her without asking questions, and that the least she could do is not insult me in front of our parents and her kids. She got defensive, said I was overreacting and that she didn't mean it that way. I told her that until she could apologize and actually mean it, I was done babysitting. She hung up on me. Since then, everything's been messy. My mom called me the next day, saying that Maggie was really upset and struggling because now she didn't have anyone to watch the kids while she worked. I explained everything to my mom. The comments, how Maggie had been treating me, and why I couldn't keep putting myself in that position. My mom understood, but she also said Maggie was under a lot of stress and that I should try to forgive her. I told her I'd forgive Maggie when Maggie actually apologized. A few days later, Maggie texted me. She didn't apologize, but she did say she needed me to watch the kids on Friday because she had a shift and nobody else could do it. I told her no again. She then sent me a series of long messages saying that I was punishing her kids for something that wasn't their fault, that they missed me, and that I was being selfish. That one stung. I love those kids, and the thought of them feeling like I didn't want to see them made me feel like the worst uncle. But I also knew I couldn't let Maggie continue treating me this way. My dad eventually got involved. He doesn't usually step in during our fights, but he called and asked if we could talk. He explained that Maggie was really struggling, that she'd made some bad financial decisions, and that she was barely getting by. He told me she'd been lashing out because of stress and fear, not because she actually thought I was a loser. I told him I understood, but that it wasn't an excuse. I said I'd always be there for Maggie because I love her, but I couldn't let her keep treating me like dirt. He said he understood, but I could tell he was disappointed. After the talk with my dad, I felt a mix of emotions. I was still angry at Maggie for taking me for granted and for hurling hurtful words without any consideration. But there was also guilt and sadness. Part of me felt that maybe this was somehow my fault. I'd always been the big brother who was supposed to have it together and step up when things got tough. Now here I was, refusing to help the one person I'd always promised to protect. I knew Maggie was struggling, but I also felt that my own challenges had been completely dismissed. Her words had hurt me, and I couldn't just ignore that. I was still reflecting on all this when Maggie called. I saw her name on my phone and hesitated. I thought about letting it go to voicemail, but a part of me hoped she was calling to apologize, that she'd realized how much her words had hurt and was ready to make things right. So, I answered. The conversation started off awkwardly. Maggie didn't exactly sound remorseful. Her tone was tight, and I could sense she was holding back her frustration. She asked me more as a demand than a request, if I could watch the kids on Friday. She said she had something important to take care of and really needed me to step up. I listened, feeling a knot in my stomach. I wanted to help. I wanted to be there for my niece and nephew as I'd always been. But the resentment was still there, lingering over everything else. I took a deep breath and told her no. I kept my tone calm, hoping she'd understand. I wasn't prepared for her reaction. Maggie didn't take it well. She immediately launched into how hard things were for her, how she was barely getting by, stressed to the max, and how I didn't understand what it was like to be in her position. She said I had no idea what it was like to have kids, and that by refusing to help, I was making her life even more difficult. Her tone cut deep, as though she was suggesting that because I didn't have kids, my own struggles didn't really count. I was taken aback. While I knew Maggie was feeling overwhelmed, I hadn't expected her to push things this far. She was piling on the guilt, trying to paint me as a lousy brother for not stepping up to help. But it dawned on me that Maggie didn't view my support as a choice or favor. She saw it as a duty. In her eyes, I was supposed to help simply because we were family. That assumption, that my help was just expected, hurt more than anything. Maggie didn't hold back. She kept going, her words growing harsher and more cutting. She claimed I had no real responsibilities, that I just sat around all day doing nothing. She said I was being selfish, that I didn't even have a busy life to justify my refusal. Her dismissive tone stoked my anger. It felt like she was ignoring all that I'd been through, the uncertainty, the stress of trying to build a career, and the hard work I'd put into making something of myself. To her, I was just a lazy brother floating through life without a worry. At that moment, something inside me just gave way. I felt my last bit of patience disappear. I knew I couldn't keep this up. If I gave in now, I'd be letting Maggie think she could say whatever she liked, treat me however she wanted, and I'd still be there without hesitation. I realized I couldn't let myself be treated like that. I couldn't keep placing myself in a situation where I was devalued, where my worth seemed to be measured only by how much I could do for her. I told Maggie no again, this time with more resolve. I made it clear that I wasn't going to babysit and that she would need to sort things out herself. I could hear the disbelief in her voice as she tried to push back, but I held firm. My heart was pounding, and every word from her only strengthened my resolve. She was upset, frustrated, and I could tell she didn't understand why I was saying no. But I also knew I couldn't let her keep treating me this way. She hung up, and I sat there looking at my phone, feeling a strange mix of anger, sadness, guilt, and, oddly enough, a sense of relief. Friday began like any other day. I still had the argument with Maggie on my mind, but I was set on focusing on my own life for a change. I was working to create a routine, to stay productive, and make progress on some freelance projects I hoped would eventually lead to something more stable. Staying motivated wasn't easy, given all the uncertainty, but I was making strides. For the first time in a while, I was starting to feel like I was on the right path, even if it was just a small step in the bigger picture. Around noon, I was fully immersed in my work, finally making progress on a project I'd been struggling with for a while. Then the doorbell rang, jolting me out of my focus. My heart sank. I already had a sense of who was at the door. A feeling of dread washed over me, and as soon as I opened the door, my suspicions were confirmed. Maggie stood there with her kids, each holding one of her hands. She looked worn out, with a look of determination, almost defiance, that I recognized immediately. Maggie walked right past me without a word, bringing the kids inside before I even had a chance to process what was happening. My niece and nephew, sweet as always, smiled at me as they came in, completely unaware of the tension between their mom and me. They looked thrilled to be there, excited even, which only made things harder. I felt a flood of emotions, anger at Maggie, confusion, sadness, and an overwhelming sense of helplessness. I tried to explain to Maggie that today wasn't a good day, that I had work to do and responsibilities to focus on. I was trying to stay calm, not to show my frustration in front of the kids, but Maggie was having none of it. She didn't want to hear my reasons. She'd already made up her mind to leave them with me. She brushed off everything I said as though it were just an excuse, like I was being difficult on purpose. Her gaze was hard, almost accusing, as if I were failing her in some critical way. She told me she was done with my excuses, that she had somewhere important to be, and that it was my duty as their uncle to help her out. She said that family was supposed to be there for each other, and I was being selfish by saying no. There was a finality in her voice, like her mind was made up and nothing I could say mattered. Before I could react, she gave me a forced smile, told the kids she'd be back later, and walked out the door. I stood there, stunned, watching her leave without looking back. She just got in her car and drove off, leaving me with my niece and nephew. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I couldn't believe what had just happened. I knew Maggie was upset, but I hadn't thought she'd go this far. It felt like she was testing me, pushing me to see if I'd give in and do what she wanted because she knew I didn't have a choice. I looked down at the kids, both smiling up at me, and my heart broke a little. They had no idea what was going on. They didn't know about the arguments, the hurtful words, or the tension between their mom and me. They were just happy to see their uncle, excited to spend the day with me. I forced a smile, trying to keep my feelings in check. None of this was their fault, and I didn't want them to feel like they were a burden. But inside, I felt trapped, frustrated, and utterly disrespected. The rest of the day felt like a haze. I tried my best to keep the kids entertained, to make sure they were happy and occupied. But my mind kept drifting back to Maggie. Her dismissive look, the way she'd just left without a second thought, it all replayed in my head. I kept remembering all the times I'd been there for her, dropping everything to help, only for her to treat it like it didn't matter at all. I felt used, like my kindness was taken for granted, like I was nothing more than a convenience in her life. Later that evening, I finally managed to get the kids to settle down. It was almost bedtime, and they were starting to drift off, yawning as we watched their favorite cartoon one last time. The day had been exhausting, but I put on a brave face for them. They're good kids, innocent, playful, and blissfully unaware of the tension between their mom and me. All they wanted was to spend time with their uncle, and I did everything I could to give them a fun day. But I was emotionally drained, and I kept glancing at my phone, waiting for Maggie to call and say she was coming to get them. Finally, my phone buzzed, and I let out a sigh of relief, hoping she was on her way. I picked up, expecting her to say she'd be there soon. Instead, she told me to bring the kids to her. It felt like a punch to the gut. I'd spent the entire day looking after her children without any notice or regard for what I had going on. And now she expected me to pack them up and drive them back. I was stunned, and for a moment, I didn't know how to react. It felt like Maggie was reaching a new low. She didn't ask if I was okay with it, and didn't consider that I might be exhausted after dealing with her kids all day, while juggling my own emotions. It wasn't a request, it was a demand, as if I existed just to be at her beck and call. There wasn't a trace of appreciation in her tone, no acknowledgement that I'd stepped up when she needed me, despite her treatment of me. It was just another expectation, another way of taking advantage of me, and it stung. I felt a mix of anger and disbelief. But she didn't care about my feelings. She was only focused on what she wanted, repeating that it was my responsibility to bring them back. Her entitled tone made it clear she assumed I'd comply. I could barely form a response, my head spinning. How could she be so dismissive, so oblivious to how her actions affected me? It was as if she genuinely believed my life didn't matter as much as hers. Eventually, I agreed, feeling sick to my stomach, not because I thought she was right, but because I knew the kids needed to get home. I didn't want them caught up in our conflict. They'd had a good day, and I wasn't going to ruin it for them. So I packed up their things and got them into my car and started the drive to Maggie's place. Every mile felt heavier, like a reminder of how little respect she had for me. When I arrived, she was waiting outside, arms crossed with that same defiant look. There was no sign of appreciation or recognition for what I'd done. She didn't thank me, didn't apologize for the inconvenience. She just took the kids, barely glancing at me, and informed me she'd be bringing them over again tomorrow. It was as if she hadn't heard anything I'd said, like the past few days meant nothing to her. She assumed I'd do it all over again without hesitation. I stood there, stunned, absorbing her nerve and entitlement. She treated me like a babysitter, someone obligated to drop everything whenever she needed help. My blood boiled as she spoke, but this time, I wasn't going to let it go. I told her no. I told her I wouldn't babysit again until she could show me respect, until she could acknowledge that I had my own life and that my time mattered. Maggie looked surprised, like she hadn't expected any resistance. She tried to argue, saying it was my duty as her brother and that family was supposed to support each other. She said if I was offended by a joke, then fine. She was sorry, but it was clear she didn't mean it. It wasn't an apology, just empty words meant to get me to give in. There was no sincerity, no understanding of why I was hurt by her words and actions. To her, I was overreacting, like my feelings didn't count. Frustrated, I realized I wasn't going to get through to her. She wasn't ready to see things from my side or understand how her actions had impacted me. She was still absorbed in her own issues, unable to see beyond them. So I simply nodded, turned around, and headed back to my car. I could feel her watching, but I didn't look back. I was done explaining myself, done trying to make her see why I was hurt. I went home that night feeling drained, but also oddly at peace. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was standing up for myself, like I was finally taking control of my life. It wasn't easy, and I knew this wouldn't be the end of it, but it felt like a step forward. I love my family, but I couldn't keep letting them take advantage of me. I needed to set boundaries, to make it clear that my time and feelings mattered too. And if Maggie couldn't see or respect that, then maybe it was time to take a step back, to focus on myself and let her figure things out without relying on me as her safety net. Am I the asshole for refusing to babysit my sister's kids after she called me a loser? Commentary time. You're not the asshole here. It's clear that you love your niece and nephew and have always gone above and beyond to help your sister, even when it disrupted your own life. However, your sister's ongoing dismissal of your efforts and her outright disrespect is unfair and hurtful, especially considering all you've done for her over the years. Her comment at the family dinner wasn't just a one-off joke. It reflected her growing disregard for the work you're doing and the value you bring, even if it's not a traditional 9-to-5. It sounds like she's become accustomed to relying on you, without appreciating that you have your own responsibilities, ambitions, and struggles. It's understandable that you reached a point where you needed to set boundaries and protect your own well being. You've tried to communicate how her words and actions have affected you, and you even gave her multiple chances to apologize. Her refusal to acknowledge the impact of her words and her entitlement in expecting you to drop everything at a moment's notice isn't acceptable. Setting boundaries is healthy and necessary, especially when someone takes you for granted. You're not refusing to help her out of spite, you're simply asking for respect and acknowledgement. Hopefully, this boundary will encourage her to recognize the impact of her words and actions on you. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more real life experiences like it, make sure to like this video, comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you're always updated when a new story drops. Join our community and share your perspective. Your input makes these conversations even richer. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.